Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. This show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA metro area. Now, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about before the camera started rolling. My guest this evening is Steve Thiem, a fellow poet who I met not too long ago and discovered he's also a writer and all sorts of other things. And I've got a copy of his book here, Asphalt Asylum, and we'll be talking about that and whatever else comes up. And I'm nervous again all over. How are you feeling right now?
I feel pretty good.
Pretty good?
Yes.
Are you nervous?
I'm ready to make mistakes and, learn from them.
Thanks for coming.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty short notice too, and here you are. We're going to talk about your book and all kinds of other stuff. So as you know, the show goes in two major segments. The first is where I'll talk about you, so the viewers have an idea who you are, where you came from, and other impressions before they learn what you wrote about, what you talk about in your book. Mm-hmm. So if I ask you a question that you don't want to answer, just say, I don't want to answer that, or get lost or something.
Okay.
And I think it's pretty safe what I'm going to be asking you, but also I want to warn you, occasionally I ask a trick question, one you don't expect.
Okay.
And see what your response is going to be.
Okay.
And for you viewers out there who've not seen the show before, who I am a clinical psychologist, retired. I also nowadays producing and hosting my TV show. I have a small private practice as a counselor, psychotherapist, psychologist in an office in my home. And I accept a few clients now and then, if you're very nice. And I'm also a humanist minister, and I marry people and bury them, and that's enough about me. Now we're going to talk about you.
Okay.
And you're not nervous?
Surprisingly not. I'm not.
Yeah. See, I'm the only one who gets nervous in these kinds of situations. If I were to ask your best friend, who is Steve? What would your best friend say? Steve is what? Be the first
buzz
person.
off. I don't want to answer that.
That's a great beginning.
Yeah, I know. Who's Steve?
Steve is?
Steve is
Yeah.
a guy with some energy who runs around a lot, tries to direct the energy in a positive place, succeeds most of the time, and enjoys being with people. That's I mean, I like to engage people, and if I ever hear my voice more than I think I should, which I may on this show.
Never happened.
Never happened. Okay. Let folks talk and listen to their stories, and so I guess I like to listen. I like to talk. That's pretty undefined.
And that comes out in your book, yeah, that you like to listen, and that's one of my favorite things is listening. I learned in later years how important it is to really listen with all of my faculties, not just with my ears. But this is your show, not mine, so let me go back to you again. And when and where were you born?
Seattle, Washington, Swedish hospital, 1958. Back when, growing up in Seattle, spectacular. Just a ultimately beautiful city, virtually no traffic, and things like that. And of course, these days, a lot of people found out what a beautiful city it is. And now in Portland, reminds me of Seattle 20 years ago.
Because guys like you are blabbing about how wonderful it is up here in the Northwest.
No, I had zipper lip. I didn't know. But yeah, obviously it's changed over the years.
Yeah. Any significant about your racial or national or cultural heritage, or you just plain old American white bread?
I am an American mutt. I've got some British, English, Scottish, Norwegian, whatever, and my name is German. Although how much German I have, I honestly don't know.
You're an honest guy. Some of these people who insist, well, I know just exactly where I came from. I had this done and that done, and baloney.
Yeah.
A lot of wood piles back then. All sorts of things went on.
Lots. I'm just an American.
Okay. And a question about a religious preference. Do you have one, or
Sure.
did you ever have one?
Currently, I'm an active member in the United Church of Christ. And sometimes and we even talk about this in the church, if you were to say I am a Christian, to some degree there's a very broad brush that is, oh, well then you're against same-sex marriage, and you're against this, and you believe the world was made in 6 days, and no, none of that. The denomination I'm part of is called Open and Affirming. We welcome everybody. We've had same-sex marriages in our church, of which my daughter sang at 2 of them. And as my pastor says, something I take comfort in, God loves an honest doubter. And
Oh, I like that.
yeah, so we all search. Nobody has all the answers. And I like that kind of approach, even within a fairly structured mainstream denomination.
I make a distinction between Christian with a small c and a capital C, because it's a broad brush when you say Christian. Anyhow, we're getting to my having been a Roman Catholic kid who is still dealing with guilt from too many mea culpas. So, your formal education.
Formal education. Obviously did the high school thing, got out of there, and I went to Seattle Central Community College. They had a program in marine engineering, which isn't the type of, it's not design engineering. It's kind of like an engineer on a train, the guy who blows the whistle and runs the machinery. And so I learned, I'd been around boats most of my life, and I wanted to, the plan was to go there, learn some more about fishing boats, go to Alaska and fish and make enough money to come back and go to the University of Washington, which in a very circuitous path I did. But also went by way of North Seattle Community College, Western Washington University, and then eventually 4 years at the UW with a degree in technical writing.
Technical writing?
Technical writing, yeah.
That was one of the things I did in the past a long time ago.
Okay.
Tech writer, so I know what that's like.
Yes, yep, back when software manuals were actually manuals, hard copy, and you could hold them. But that ended quite a while ago, and I've been in marketing for most of my career.
And you still earn your keep by working for a company or somebody?
Yeah, I've got a day job with Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield, and in their marketing department, I am their email manager. So send out hundreds of thousands of emails, none of which are spam. But that's the day job part. Yeah.
Do you like your job?
I love it.
Good.
It's great.
How long you been there?
Today's the 15th, 16th.
Yeah.
1 year exactly today.
Really?
Yeah.
You still love it?
Yes, I do. I do.
That's a good operation to work for. I've heard other people I've met who work for those kinds of organizations. And taking care of fellow human beings is certainly a commendable
It's
effort.
a different environment than my previous positions, and I really enjoy it.
Good. You have a partner, a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife?
I
or
have a
something?
wife of 26 years.
26 years?
26 years, I know. Sheila, who is in the acknowledgments, of course. Wonderful lady. She's a special education teacher with the Beaverton School District and helps teach learning disabled kids how to read.
That's commendable.
Yes, it is. And other things.
I want to be sure and have you get a picture of this book again, because I enjoyed it immensely. I want to be sure that we show this a number of times. Asphalt Asylum. And I'll ask you what that means later on.
Okay.
And you had one daughter who sang.
Right. I have a 18-year-old daughter who just started at Lewis and Clark here in Portland. My oldest is 24, and he just started working at Intel out in Hillsboro just about a month and a half ago as a physicist. Ooh, yes, yes, he's far sharper than I am. And then another son who's at Portland State, looking at a degree in geology. So, no complaints.
Are they bright kids?
Oh,
What else can you say?
what else can you? Yeah, what else can you say? Yes, they're very bright kids.
I can
Yep.
tell, of course, by what you said so far about them. Will you comment about your political persuasion, left, right, center, or what?
Oh, sure. I'll comment about that. I never have been affiliated with a party. Vote for the candidate. I've voted Republican, Democrat, Independent, and Green. And so, yeah, I'm I guess a true independent.
Wow, there's a rare person because the evidence is there now, you know. I spread a rumor around the gym this morning. We occasionally, along with our workouts, we just visit for a few moments. Sometimes it goes longer than that. And I said, I heard that Donald Trump is going to win the GOP nomination for the presidency. And he's also going to win the general election. He's going to defeat the Democrats' candidate also. And he's also going to choose Sarah Palin as his running mate. And they almost ran me out of the gym. Never mind.
You know,
Enough of my sillies.
I guess stranger things have happened, but I don't know.
I don't know either. Memberships in political, social, or civic organizations. Do you have any of those kinds of memberships worth mentioning now?
Worth mentioning, I do belong to several fellowships. And with the church. And what else? It seems like there's a couple other things. I'll stop at that.
Sure. Any persons from the past or alive today that you look up to or looked up to or particularly admire? Any names come to mind?
Sure, absolutely. I've always said everyone has to have a hero. You've got to have heroes.
Yeah.
And Winston Churchill is one for me. A relatively average man who really rose to the occasion.
Yeah.
And then sort of became an average man again after that.
Yeah.
Churchill, it's a great question, and I have several others that that are not coming to mind right now. Thomas Jefferson. Someone like that. I read a fair number of biographies, and the more I learn about these people, the more certainly complex, not necessarily the more stellar they don't necessarily become. You see their human side, and but nonetheless, great respect.
Yeah. We were taught when I was doing my graduate work in psychology to ask a question of a client when you're gathering information about background and depth. What was your favorite comic strip character, for example? And Prince Valiant was mine.
There you go. There you go. Yes.
Yeah. And that takes you someplace else, but we're not going to go there because you're not on my couch right now.
Okay.
How do you see the mainstream media in this country? Is it left, right, or centrist, generally speaking?
Mainstream media from the news organizations have, television in particular, have kind of devolved into ambulance chasers. I would say 50% of the news stories would have local impact, but national, the stuff sometimes that CNN or Fox runs, it just doesn't seem, it's just ambulance chasing without a broader impact or social implications. It's just, here's this thing, some husband got crazy and, shot some relatives. That's just ambulance chasing to put that on New York to Los Angeles, from Chicago to Miami, and it's just, and we accept it as news.
Because we've been taught that this is news.
Because, yeah.
And you said the magic phrase, social implications. That's long gone when it comes to the corporate or the mainstream media. I slipped my partisanship showed when I said corporate. And luckily with the internet and those kinds of things, you can do some searching. There is some other information available about what's going on in the world and things to do with social responsibility and those kinds of things. So I dig pretty much, and there's not enough time to keep going because that darn Google I mean, I can spend 36 hours a day because I'm just curious. I love to keep learning, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to make it sound like the big networks are just ambulance chasers. They have legitimate news, of course, but sometimes I see so many stories and just don't understand why they're airing them.
Yeah. What's most important nowadays to pay attention to in America? What's most important to pay attention to nowadays?
From a personal standpoint, regardless if you're an American or not, is looking at part of your life from a service perspective. That, you know, how can I be of service to the community? That's important to America. And that's not the president or any government official. That's just you as an individual, assuming that responsibility.
Yeah.
So that's important. From a political standpoint, I quiver about the national debt.
Yeah.
That has me very concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously anyone could go on and on about military entanglements and what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
But entanglement, I think, is the right word for what's happening in the world these days.
Oh. Is America an empire?
An empire.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that's such an old. I mean, it's a word that's been used historically.
Yeah, and I'm old, so I have permission to use those ancient words.
Yeah, I mean, you think of the Roman Empire or the British Empire with such broad colonization. I don't know if that word is America is empire. I would say, in the classic sense of the word, probably not. Do we exert our influence the way an empire did? Is it as blatant as taking over a chunk and saying, here's my flag, you're now mine? No, not as blatant as that.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly in terms of exercising influence beyond its borders, there's an empire element to it that way.
Yeah, I got maybe a couple more brief questions before we take a break. What's wrong with America? And what's right with America? And you're only entitled to say two things about what's wrong with America, because this is not, look how awful the world is.
Sure. Yeah.
And then all the things that you like about what's going on in our country today. Say a few things about those, if you will. Wrong and right.
Wrong. Everyone, and rightfully so, Congress is locked up. But if you look at public surveys on the issues that they're locked up on, the public is split about 50-50. So that lockup, if you will, reflects the will of the people, even though there's this. What's wrong? Too much this. Too much, we have to have it my way, not enough compromise. Whatever party you may be affiliated or not affiliated with, there just doesn't seem to be the give and take needed to move forward. And in part, it's not just the politicians. Those are the people we elect. And I think they, to a reasonable, and this is what's right with America, to a reasonable amount, they do reflect our will. Because it's just, if you look at polls and then look at the votes, they're pretty close in terms of percentages of yays and nays as to what the average person thinks as what goes down, in Washington, D.C.
What the average person thinks, that's a provocative proposition, because we think based on what we're taught and what we learn, and we're all human beings and susceptible to being conditioned or taught what it is or how to think or whatever to think. I'm afraid of whatever it is that's causing it. Real independent thinking in the average American citizen is long gone by the wayside. They're so conditioned and taught what and how to think.
We certainly have a lot of messages being thrown at us, telling us what and how to think, and how to feel, and how to look, and all that stuff that previous generations maybe didn't have that much input, constant input, where they could have time to develop themselves.
Let's take a minute or so more before we take our break about you're deciding to be a poet, and I appreciate in our poetry reading group the stuff that you present, and that aspect of you, the artistic aspect of it. How did you come into that? Is that in your genetic makeup, or?
I have asked myself a number of times. Nobody in my family, let's say writing, really wrote, but my mother was an avid reader, and fairly early on, I remember her handing me like a book, here's some Jack London, or here's P.G. Wodehouse, and funny stuff and old stuff, and here's Ogden Nash, and you get some humorous poetry, and then you have Robert Service and the stuff from the North, and then it expands from there to more contemporary poets. But I think that's where it started, was she just handed me a couple of books and said, you might be interested. And
that's how she said it to you.
Yeah, and off I went.
I have a special feeling about people of an artistic bent, whether it be poetry or music or writing or anything of that nature. I regret that I'm going to only live to be 110, because I should live to be 300 years old. There's so much more to learn, man.
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
You have another book in the middle?
Yes and no. I have a piece of fiction I've been thinking about for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll be honest, I probably read 80% nonfiction, maybe not 75-25. And I'm not sure I want to step into a fiction world until I become more versed in the various genre that I want to write in. And there's another potential nonfiction book that sort of is, to some degree, a follow-on to this book. Mm-hmm. And lately I've been doodling with short stories, short fiction stories, and they've been getting published, and it's kind of been surprising. So who knows? But I haven't dove into a full-on, this is the book, this is the project, here goes another couple years. Haven't started on that path yet.
I'm waiting for the next book.
Okay.
So let's take a break, Mr. E, and then we'll go into the second half of the show, please. Okay, we're back, and for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. It's a show that I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about anything else that we've decided to talk about. We've talked about a bunch of stuff to do with Steve's personal life, and now we're going to go into what he did with Asphalt Asylum and other questions related to that, and anything else that comes to mind. Are we doing okay?
So far, so good.
Yeah, right? Yeah, this trip, how long were you on this trip?
It was about 2 months.
2 months?
Mm-hmm.
You got so much done in 2 months.
Some of those days were action-packed. There's no question about it. When I went back and actually looked at my journal and looked at everything, I was surprised that it was only 2 months, because it seems longer. Maybe I need to look. Maybe it was 3 months, but I think it was 2.
It's amazing, because there's so much that went on in that period of time. It seems like it'd be much longer, and it would take much more time to pack those number of events and different kinds of characters that you associated with. However, sometimes only 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever. I don't want to give the book away.
Right. Yeah, it was. the pace, the hitch, and this is I hitchhiked 7,000 miles for if folks don't know that. The pace of the experiences were like coming out of a machine gun. You know, 1 minute I was with a NASA scientist, the next minute I'm with a hillbilly, the next minute I'm with a mafia hitman. And so I think it put many more diverse experiences in a much smaller period of time than probably any time in my life, which is part of the reason I wrote it. You know, life is big.
Yeah. Why'd you go on this trip? Why'd you leave to go on this trip?
I left when I was about 19, and you asked about, you know, some of my education.
Mm-hmm.
I had been at the University of Washington 2 quarters as a freshman, and I had been in Alaska for 6 months prior to that, fishing. Graduated high school early and whatnot, but when I came back, I was paying for my own education, and I was living with my parents, and the house was not always, it wasn't a happy place, and I just felt, one, kind of out of place. A lot of my peers in school, I think in the book I called them pampered pets. They had cars and parties, and I worked as a janitor and at night and went to school during the day, and I started getting an attitude of resentment, and I could see it, but I couldn't stop it. And eventually I started, if you will, getting mad at being mad. And once that happens, it feeds on itself.
Of course.
And that's when I said, time out, got to do something. Had no money, didn't know people anywhere really. And so it was just sort of a, I'd have to say desperation. It was, what am I going to do? I guess I'm just going to leave. And without a car, without money, without people to go to, I just stood there on the side of the road.
Stood on the side when your mother dropped you off on the freeway?
Right, yep, I did get that first ride. I asked my mom to drop me off at I-5 up in Seattle, and she did. And she drove away, and things started. You
know, I remember things similar, a few things that happened to me is reading about your trip and the people you ran into. And a brief story about me. I had a breakdown with a car. I was living in LA at the time, and I was up near Seattle, but then I decided, and I had money, I had credit cards and everything else, to come back home because I left the car, and I thought, I'm going to hitchhike home.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I didn't do much with that afro because my hair is soft like a white boy's, you know. And I still had bushy hair, and I had bib overalls and was scroungy looking. And it took hours to finally get any kind of a ride. People took one look at me and says, I don't want to go through that character.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember for hours getting overheated there for 3 and 4 hours at a time. And as I was reading this, I went back and kind of regressed to that period of time. Finally, I got to Bakersfield. I says, I've had it. Where's the Greyhound depot?
There you go.
I got money, I can go, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a number of instances like that I identify with you. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why it was particularly pleasant for me to read. Next question. Would you encourage young people today to hitchhike to gain experiences outside of a classroom?
Right. For a number of drafts, the very first line of the book was, no one should ever hitchhike unless it's an emergency. And so, and I liked that line, but it ended up, it's gone now. But nonetheless, no, I wouldn't recommend anyone hitchhike ever unless it's an emergency. But you have to get outside of yourself as anyone. But as a young person, I think, and I was, becoming insulated within the people I associated with were like me, they were my age, they were my race, and it just felt the world, like I said, the world's a big place. And so today, for not just young people, but anybody, I think that, and it goes back to being of service, to get outside of your clique, your comfort zone, or everyone is socio-economically similar, volunteer. You know, go to a homeless shelter or a senior center or helping, you know, kids after school, and instantly you'll be exposed to people who are dissimilar from you.
So there are other ways to get away from it on second thought, other than going to the extreme of going naked hitchhiking across the country.
Right. That's that. There's a lot safer ways to gain that experience. Yes.
Yeah. How'd you come up with the title of that book? Asphalt Asylum.
Asphalt Asylum.
Interesting.
It. I would like to say, the muse struck me, and I loved it, and it was wonderful. And that's not how it worked. I would write down titles. I stopped counting at 380. Clearly, I know I had over 400, and I didn't stop till I got one I liked, and I like this one quite a lot. So,
tenacious.
yes, and so that's how I came up with it. And not to sound overly pompous, but the asylum part most people think of as the loony bin, that type of thing. Asylum is also a sanctuary and a refuge. And I'd like to think, and I don't know if anyone else is going to think this, that in this instance it applies to both.
Interesting, because I hadn't thought about the latter. I just thought about the first consideration of it is loony bins or asylum. One flew over the cuckoo's nest or something.
Right, exactly, and that's probably what most people, and it's still appropriate. Ran into a lot of kooky people. But at least for me, I like to also understand that it was a refuge and a sanctuary to get away and to heal.
And you got some of that done?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
What made you want to write this book, and why do you want to write it now? I think you answered that somewhat, aren't you?
Well, yeah, and also I wrote it to... I was waiting till my children got old enough, because there's things in here you don't probably let your 5-year-old learn about you at that stage. They're old enough to understand it and to get a little better feel of, I wasn't always their father. And again, life is big. Here's this guy they've known their entire lives, and he had this whole other life prior to me ever knowing him. And they can then look at their own lives and go, gosh, all the things I can do. That, and also, and I'll be perfectly honest, at the time, my second son had cancer. He was 16 years old, and shortly after he was diagnosed, I lost my job. And so I didn't want to sit around and let my mind spin in places that weren't good. And so it's time to write this book, and it kept me focused and allowed me to deal with what we had to deal with better. I wasn't obsessing on it. And it just seemed like it was the right time. I had the time, and it was a good thing to do.
And you managed, and you stayed with it and got through it, and you didn't get mortally depressed?
Not generally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it took a lot of, luckily, as most, probably any writer enjoys writing.
Yeah.
And so it was enjoyable most of the time. There were times when I always thought, okay, now I'm a real writer, when I did not want to write. I felt sick. I'm editing paper, and drips of snot are falling out of my nose onto the paper, and I will just want to go to bed. And that's when I went, okay, now I'm a real writer, because it's the discipline, and it's not just, again, waiting for the muse, which I've never felt. So it was just overall enjoyable most of the time.
I'm picking your brain because I've got 2 or 3 attempts at writing, and even a few outlines, and I've started, and I'm learning how it's going to be when I finally decide, when I'm 95, to put something on paper. Okay. Yeah. The main lasting effect of this 2 or 3 month journey, the main lasting effect for you?
Right. I think that it's, and I don't see this, one of those, you can't see the trees for the woods, but I'm very comfortable with a wide variety of people who are not like me, potentially in any way, even language. They don't even speak my language, I don't speak theirs. I can be pretty comfortable, and I don't necessarily see it, but I've had multiple people tell me that I'm able to relate with a very wide variety of people. I don't hesitate to do so. I think that that's part of what's come from this journey.
So it's better now than before you took the journey.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It's amazing what you can cram into a couple or 3 months. Next question.
Sure.
Since this is self-published, did you try to go the route of traditional publishing with an agent and an established publisher? Did you try that?
Right. I did. It was that's real authors. They get it. They say, "Oh, my agent," and oh, they have an agent. And I went out. I had several agents who asked for my manuscript. When it was all said and done, because it was all on a spreadsheet of who I contacted, 127 rejections. Luckily, I've got fairly thick skin. And so that's a lot of rejection. But I wasn't going to not publish the book. And to be honest, if I was an agent, I would not have picked me up as a client. There's a thing called a platform. How many people will immediately buy your book once it comes out the front door? And my number wasn't big enough for them to be interested. And that's fine. It's their lives and their businesses, and they run them as they see fit. And they were clear, oh, the writing's really good, but your platform's not big enough. So I went ahead and went the self-published route.
Say a few words about platform. What do you mean?
Oh, sure. Context? Platform is, let's say you're a psychologist and you're an expert in your field, and you give talks at conventions, and you have hundreds of people out in front of you, and the agent will look at that, and so will the publisher, and say, that's part of your platform. When you're done talking to those hundreds of people, you start selling your book or what have you. So they want somebody with a established public presence. So when they say, hey, I've got something, there's people listening on the other end.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Where did you learn about marketing books? That must have been an interesting research.
Marketing books was, I worked for a publisher, actually, that helped self-publish authors, get their books and lay them out and publish them. And because I've been in marketing the vast bulk of my career, I wanted to learn more about the publishing industry. Going in to work for a publisher was a great way to do it. I learned a tremendous amount, learned a lot of, and I was able to pass it on to the authors I worked with as far as the importance of reviews and of getting out and getting in bookstores and really putting yourself out there, which most writers or many writers are somewhat, reticent to do, because writing is such a solitary activity that you have to switch from, here I am in my desk by myself in the quiet, which is how I like to write, in the quiet, to going out and, trying to wave the flag a little.
All right. In today's book market with self-publishing, what is the main mistake you think most self-published authors make? What's your main mistake you made?
Right. Well, not so much my main mistake. I haven't made my main mistake yet, I think. I'm waiting for that. Or maybe I haven't, don't know it. But I think the main mistake, again, I've worked with dozens of authors, is the thought that writing sells a book. I'm a good writer, that's going to make it sell. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Marketing sells books, not writing. Writing can make it sell well, but it's, and many of the people, I spoke with one gentleman who put his book up on Amazon as a Kindle book. Nothing, not a single download, nothing. And he thought there was something wrong with his writing. And I said, well, no, what sort of marketing did you do? I said, well, I put it up there. Well, That's not, and when I speak with authors and they don't like the word and I don't like the word, when you're writing, it's passion and you're into it and da-da-da. When you're done writing, what you've produced is a widget. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a widget and you've got to go promote it. It won't promote itself. Writing doesn't sell a book. And I think a lot of the authors that I worked with came in with, I've written this thing, the writing will carry it. And that's not how the industry works.
God, I'm going to have to pay you for this interview.
Okay, that's...
Yeah. The story is also a spiritual journey. Spiritual journey. Explain how that evolved. But first, tell me what you mean by spiritual journey.
Right. I think that obviously there's more than just the physical, the miles and the days and the people.
Yeah.
When I left, and I described briefly, and I won't go into detail, but how I stopped believing in God on the day of my baptism because of the way it went. By the time I left at the age of 19, I was a dyed-in-the-wool atheist. Just life was simple. There was no God. There's no spirit. There's no nothing. When you die, the party's over. And there's no one here with us now. We're just alone. And I was pretty well convinced of that. As the journey progressed, enough things happened that, and you know, some people will say, oh, that's coincidence. Yes, there can be coincidence. But there's some things that were not coincidence because they happened inside of me. It wasn't two physical activities out here, oh, what a coincidence. And so as more and more of those started to pile up, I'd like to say that it was a journey from being a dyed-in-the-wool agnostic to, or excuse me, dyed-in-the-wool atheist to considering agnosticism. But that's the first step. You know, if that's a journey that you're on, that's one of the first steps is I'm willing to entertain the idea, whereas before I was not.
Okay.
It's not a big step, but it's a first step.
Spiritual. What does that term mean, spiritual?
Sure. And it's a lot of people, oh, I have a spiritual life, things like that. Spiritual is the root of the word spirit. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it. It's spirit, as it were. And a lot of folks, I'll digress here just a moment, will say,
Sure.
I go out to nature, and they'll say, no, there's no God, or there's nothing squishy like that, but I go to nature and I'm spiritual. That reflects their values and, you know, where they might feel comfortable, but frankly, there's nothing spiritual about nature. You can touch it and smell it and feel it and mold it and destroy it and fix it, and that's not spirit. Some people say I feel closer to God. Okay, but nature in and of itself is a very physical thing. And what we imbue our emotions into it is something else. But spiritual is having some faith that we're not alone, basically. You know, yeah.
Some authors think of spirit or spiritual in terms of feelings, those descriptions of something that goes on in my human self beyond what my cortex or neocortex is capable of. I can't put my finger on it, I can't show it to you, but it's a feeling that I have. Beyond satisfaction, beyond joy, beyond appreciating being alive, experiencing my very existence. I use the illustration of a baby that connects with me at a supermarket checkout line, and that baby that's 4 months old, mom doesn't know what's going on, but baby looks at me and becomes fascinated and looks at me with a total openness. And the baby's eyes and our eyes meet, and I sense it. That's spiritual.
We're connected.
Yeah. So it's beyond description, but I do know it can happen. Any other activity or thing going on, mental or otherwise, I can plan a program or arrange my life such that I can have that sort of experience where I end up happy or sad or unhappy. But spiritual is beyond description. I'm repeating myself. Let me stop.
To some, it can be, and it can be a feeling. It can be things that happen, and actually not just emotions. I think that there can be physical things, not very often, but I was speaking with someone, and from a spiritual sort of standpoint, and going beyond just the emotion to the question, why do bad things happen to good people? That's not an emotional thing. That's like in the physical world, this great injustice occurred, whatever it may be. And they said, so how can there be a loving spirit if these things happen? And a Catholic priest I was talking with, and this may not be mainstream Catholicism or doctrine, he said, most things just happen. They just happen. And what I read into that is maybe we're not as all hot and important as we think we are, that this spirit has to guide every little thing we do. Some things just happen. And so there's that element of, and some things really good happen. It's not just bad. But there's that component of where spiritual element simply might not even exist. Something just happened. But anyway, I'm digressing now.
Doesn't exist. Whoa. Something's happened. I can't really tell you exactly what it is, but something has happened. Something is happening, so it exists. And I'm challenging you for fun.
When I said it doesn't, I'm sorry, rephrase my words to me, if you would, what you heard. I'm not, I said it doesn't exist.
Yes.
Okay.
We were talking about feelings and other things, and you said it doesn't exist.
Right. No. It's sometimes with that, for lack of a better term, that divine connection, the emotion might not exist. The emotion inside of you does not exist, but there's something that exists outside of you in the physical world that is, again, I don't want to sound too airy-fairy, a manifestation.
You already have.
Yeah, I know.
So have I.
Too late.
We better stop this.
Okay. But that's what I meant when I said it doesn't. The emotional part doesn't necessarily have to exist for the spiritual part to exist.
Okay. We have a couple more questions.
Oh, you know.
How has being raised in an environment of physical and emotional abuse impacted your life? Your environment, physical and emotional abuse. You want to say a few words about that or not?
I could, because it is part of the book, and that was something as I was writing it I had to wrestle with. Am I going to include this in the book? But everything is true, and I felt that I should, because in part it explains me, the character. And in writing this, as I went into it, I was wondering if I'm going to learn things maybe about myself that I've not really looked at, or maybe even intentionally not looked at. And what I learned as I wrote the book, a number of traits I've exhibited throughout my life are right in line with the behaviors of people who were abused as children. Yeah. And I just thought this is the way it is. You know, I eat standing up. Apparently that's one of the things. So yeah, it was part of what set me on my way, I think. By the time I was 19, that wasn't occurring, but you know, it's impacted me in many ways, and now have learned more about some of them as I went through this process.
You're courageous. Yeah. Is this version of what you call God that you end the book with still something in your life today? What you call God, is God in your life today? And I think you alluded to that or said something to it at the very beginning.
Right. And I guess to that one thing, is God in your life. I'm convinced the word God is the most loaded word in any language, because you know what I think of when I hear it and what you think of, or what we all have a different concept. But my concept of a God, of a higher power, is very active, and I make a very conscious effort to try to stay in touch let's say prayer, it helps me understand what's important to me today. When I start praying, when I'm done, I have a better understanding of what's important to me today. And that grounding, whether anyone heard it or not, that's not for me.
You heard it.
I heard it. That's right. I heard it. So I still try to, I try to stay in touch.
Okay. And it works for you?
When I work it works for me, yes.
Yeah. Did you learn anything about yourself while writing this book? That's a dumb question now, considering what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah. Well, I'm the one who wrote the question, so I'm the one who put the dumb question in.
At this point in time.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, obviously I did learn a few things. Mm-hmm. Aside from some of my traits today that maybe have carried over from childhood, I learned, and this was I didn't realize this until people started reading the book, what I sort of thought of as standard, in fact, or a given, was neither standard nor a given for most people. And how unusual and special, but the experiences I had here throughout this book, which is part of why I wrote it, I have many times thought, well, this is the baseline of how things are, and people said, no, Steve, that's not the baseline of how things are. So I learned that. There's more uniqueness there than I originally thought, not to sound too egocentric.
Sure. What's your philosophy of life?
Philosophy of life. You know, another good question I should have a good answer for. Be of service. I have a little chart I drew. The 3 most important things in life and the 3 things that fall from each of those, and they were in order of priority. And when I was all done, the things got more important as you went left. The thing to the farthest left was be of service. Because once you got that, a lot of other things start taking care of themselves.
So that's your philosophy. Do you walk the talk?
Sure. How about this? My book launch on October 10th, which all of your viewers are invited to, is a fundraiser for the Home Plate Youth Services that work with homeless teens. And I'm setting up actually a food program with them. I've been to Mexico to build homes. I've been to Idaho to repair homes. I'm of service a couple times a week in some of the fellowships I'm in. So I try to walk the talk. Am I perfect? Of course not. But yeah.
Yes. Sure. We have a couple of minutes left. Can you think of a memorable character that you met in your journey? And you can say a few things about that particular person or that adventure at the time.
Right. I think one of the most interesting people I ran into, a gentleman who called himself Treetop, and you remember the story.
Yes, I do.
And Treetop was a yodeler, and I had come across him. He had come across me shortly after he'd won the U.S. National Yodeling Championships in Tennessee. And of which I never knew there was such a championship, but he was the U.S. champion, and tried to teach me to yodel, and which I still can't do. But what struck me about him was his philosophy of he didn't sweat the small stuff, and he was a migrant field worker, a fruit picker, which is how he got his name, Treetop. So he was socially very low strata, migrant workers.
Sure.
Spiritually and his philosophy of life, way up here. And in terms of how he dealt with things and sort of how he moved through his life with acceptance, if you will. And so he sticks with me. In fact, I had a person contact me from Tennessee. he was staying in their house when he won the championship, and they contacted me. Some other folks have contacted me about Treetop. But anyway, like I say, everything's true.
That's delightful. Well, we're running out of time now, so let me ask you to look at the viewers out there and say something to them. Anything comes to mind
Sure,
about
absolutely.
anything at all? You
Absolutely.
Take about 30 seconds or so.
On October 10th, we'll be launching the book. Everybody is invited. It's at the Multnomah Arts Center, 7:30.
Here in Portland?
Here in Portland, right. And it is a fundraiser for Home Plate Youth Services, as well as there'll be a reading, there'll be some live music. There's plenty of seating, and it should be a fun evening. October 10th at the Multnomah Arts Center.
Hey, thank you so much. Okay, mister, we better start now before you yell at me. Public service announcements, you got one or two you want to put up before we have to stop? To watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube. There's hundreds of shows through the years, and you'll find something of interest to you, I'm sure. Another one, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be further in jeopardy than they are. We've got to end corporate personhood. We've got to reverse that Supreme Court Citizens United decision that says corporations are persons and money is speech. We've got to amend the Constitution to remedy that mistake. I'm a humanist and a humanist minister. To learn more about humanists and humanism, go to AmericanHumanist.org site and learn more about humanism and what we're about. You got another one for me? I got to remind you of KFC, and not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, and be friendly, and be charitable to you, especially you, and you.
Don, thank you.
And the control room. Thanks again for watching. See you next time. See you, Mike.